So to the panel, this next talk is going to be cannabis organic growing, healthy soil, pest management, companion planting, and much more. I'd like to welcome Josh Sarvis, Kelly Dunn, Travis Lane, and Kelvin Thomas. Organic growing is quite dear to my heart, and I'm very excited to have the panel here today. If you'd like to say a little bit about yourself and what you're currently doing in the industry, I'm going to pass the mic along to each of you, and if you give us a couple of minutes on what your origin story is.
I'm Kelly. I'm from Dragonfly Earth Medicine, and we have been cultivating we've been cultivating cannabis for a long time, both for research, observation, medicinal. We also have a business that really talks about education, so education front and foremost, about regenerative practices that are good for the earth and good for humans.
And I'm Josh, partner with Kelly and part of Dragonfly Earth Medicine. And to add to that, we help companies with living soils and regenerative systems in a new recreational or licensed paradigm. And we help them go beyond organics and to a regenerative system, because we feel like you can't sustain something that's broken, and in a lot of ways the system is kind of broken right now, so we have to regenerate life on Earth, and so we're doing that through education and through our products.
My name's Travis Lane. I'm a long-time cannabis cultivator here in BC. I pretty much grew up in the cannabis scene here in Vancouver and in Victoria. I have been growing for a long time. I converted to organic cultivation about 8 years ago, and now I use a full-on living soil system where I water only, pesticide free. I'm also a cannabis cultivation instructor at Camosun College, and currently we have a couple of consulting companies. One, Levity Solutions, which helps people staff, build, and set up methodology for cannabis cultivation for commercial purposes. And the other, Groundwork Consulting, which is helping people get licenses with a specific focus on small businesses that have existed in the illicit marketplace here in BC. And thanks for having me.
Calvin Thomas, half of White Buffalo Seed Collective. Been working for a little over 20 years, collecting landrace genetics, using their hardy genes to cross into clone-only cultivars and establish plants that are free of powdery mildew, mites, and as well right now we're working on a project in Colombia, which is 10 hectares of greenhouses, which will be applying Korean natural farming and DEM techniques to. DEM simply is people who are like nature. So, yeah.
Thank you each and all. This question is for Kelvin. Did you want to expand a little bit on that concept of DEM?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I got a little spiel here, so I'll read it off to you guys. So, DEM liquid fertilizer. So basically, you take any plants you have around your farm, you fill a barrel full of the plants, top it up with water, you add a handful of nice forest soil, you weigh down the plants with a rock or something heavy of your choice, and you ferment the plant material, and when it starts sinking in the barrel, instead of floating, it's ready to use. It's best to make DEM fertilizer from plants you will be growing for cannabis. Making JLF, DEM liquid fertilizer, for the healthiest materials. Use all parts of the plant, including the roots. So we take our cannabis plants after we're done, we take all the stalks, we take all the roots, dump them into a barrel, and add some leaf mold from a healthy tree from around your ecosystem. We use it in the soil once a week on vegging plants and on flowering plants. Basically from 1 to 1,000 and 1 to 100 homeopathic doses. We always test on a plant first to make sure everything's going nicely. And by the way, it's very, very stinky, so don't be afraid of the stink.
Thanks so much, Calvin. This next question would be for Travis. What will be the obstacles to a successful organic cultivation in Canada's stringent quality assurance program?
The quality assurance program is the primary obstacle. One of the things that we see in the quality assurance program that Health Canada has put forth under the ACMPR, which will be continuing under the Cannabis Act, is that there's a number of microbial tests for safety, quote unquote. 2 of these tests are indiscriminate, and so there's a minimum colony forming units and a minimum total yeasts and mold that are measured regardless of the effect or like the pathogen level of the bacteria they find. And so as an organic grower, a lot of my pest control involves using beneficial bacteria, using beneficial fungi, and that might be a much more difficult thing to use in the new paradigm once we become legal. And it forces us to look for different options. Biocontrols like bugs that eat other bugs are allowed, but something like a compost tea foliar spray that inoculates the surface of my plants with beneficial bacteria will cause me to fail the QA test. And so it does create a situation where we're forced to change a little bit of what we're doing in order to conform, but it's also important that we approach regulators and prove to them that the system we've been using for years is safe and effective, and that their regulations should not be outlawing these practices. I can grow using those techniques and then irradiate my cannabis if I want, and it will pass QA, but growing organically to irradiate it seems illogical. And so this is the biggest barrier that we face right now, aside from the fact that the licensing process can be onerous on small business operators. There is actually technical barriers built within the quality assurance system to organic cultivation.
Thanks so much, Travis. This would be for both Josh and Kelly. For those of you that have been with us the whole weekend, if you had an opportunity to catch their talk the other night, it was really quite well informed. They have a beautiful property that they're growing closed looped on, and all their amendments are coming from their property. Could you speak a little more to why you chose the method you grow and the pests that exist on your property?
Yeah, so we really have always resonated with growing the cannabis and the ganja underneath the sun, because it has full spectrum, it has everything that we ever wanted to have for a plant, and there's a lot of reasons to have indoor gardens. If that's too loud or whatever, but there's a lot of reasons to have indoor gardens, so it's not a thing about not having indoor gardens. But I think, and maybe even in this new paradigm and moving forward, you know, with business and everything, I think it makes a lot of sense for businesses to really consider having a greenhouse as part of their business model, because to try and survive on, you know, BC Hydro bills or whatever kind of electrical you put into it, and since we're a part of a regenerative farming, you know, movement, you know, part of that is to really consider how much energy you're putting into your cannabis, and really do we need to kill salmon and make dams and do all this stuff so that we can get enough electricity and buy a bunch of lights that are owned by Monsanto so that we can go grow cannabis that then's going to get irradiated. I mean, there's really a lot of reasons for us to choose this. So bottom line, we chose to grow mostly out of greenhouses. We chose to make the dirt from our land because it makes sense, because we resonate with natural farming techniques, because we like biodynamics, because we understand permaculture, and because we want the world to be a better place to live in. We want to save the bees, and we want to create medicine which heals humans. And so we chose to do that method, and we've been, you know, perfecting it. It's never perfect. We're always evolving, but it's been really an intentional movement for us ever since we've been together, which is a long time now, over 20 years. we've been cultivating intentionally like this, so we've seen a lot of results. And now that we work with farms all over in the U.S. and Canada and beyond, there's people that have been using these methods and testing them. And it shows, you know, your cannabinoid counts and your terpene counts and everything are better underneath the sun, and they're better with more microbiology in the soil. So naturally we want what's better and what's better for the earth. So it's kind of a win-win situation when you choose to use these natural systems. They're less expensive, you know, they're better for the earth, and they're better medicine in the end. So we feel like we just keep finding that it's worthwhile to do. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but.
No, the only thing that I would add is just to define what the word closed loop means. When we talk about regenerative farming, we also talk about closed loop farming. And closed loop means that you're not bringing anything onto your property from an outside source. All of your nutrients, all of your soil, all of your beds, like gardens, seeds, everything comes from on site. And that's what really creates terroir. And I wanted to tell you all a little bit about terroir because I think it's incredibly important as we step into this new corporate cannabis industry. Everyone who is going to be a micro producer or people that want it, they're going to have to separate themselves. They're going to have to create a brand. You're going to have the fire. You're going to have to grow something that is more potent or something that is more full spectrum. You're going to have to set aside yourself. And to have terroir sets yourself aside already. And terroir is specific to grapes. You know, the Chablis region or Pinot Noir grows in a certain type of soil, and that creates a specific type of flavor in that wine. It's the same for cannabis. So each one of you who might be having a micro license to be able to cultivate, you can plant into the ground, and automatically you would notice different flavors that were part of you know, your cultivation. And making sure that if you see some type of a seed or a plant that does amazing in that area, then that becomes biologically intelligent to your region and your zone and your area. And then that sets you aside from other companies. And I think that that is a helpful hint. So creating terroir comes from the ground. It comes from healthy microbiology. And that will help us heading into the market to be different from these huge, massive corporations that are just like, oh, you know, acres and acres of either indoor facilities or even outdoor facilities that are really unconsciously grown.
And just really quickly, it turns our farm into a positive impact on Earth rather than a negative one. We're not flushing any chemicals into the water system. We're not using any harmful chemicals that are getting combusted into the air, vaporizing into our lungs. So it's really extremely important to us that we all move together in a healthy way.
Thanks so much for that. Calvin, could you speak a little bit to why we would add calcium carbonate?
Yeah, let's talk about the king of minerals. The plant needs it on a daily basis for all growth stages, cellular growth. So what we do is we use calcium carbonate. We use a few different kinds of calcium. We use calcium carbonate to pH 6.5, and that's it. And after 6.5, we use gypsum. The reason being is because calcium carbonate over time will keep raising your pH, and that's something we don't want to happen in our soil. We always want to use the finest grind of any kind of mineral that you're adding to the soil. I just want to talk about a few other bits where calcium may come from too. Fishbone meal is another amendment that we use. It's a good source of colloidal calcium, but added for its phosphate content mostly. Crustacean meal, another one, another colloidal calcium, slow release, sea minerals, and chitin. Rock phosphate, very slow release. Comes with aluminum, generally not recommended for organic growing. Dolomite, not generally recommended, brings excessive magnesium and raises the pH. Rock dust, not generally recommended because of the aluminum content and excessive iron. Aluminum is available locally at the plant roots due to the acidic plant root exudates. Basically, I'd recommend that you all get familiar with soil testing and find a good place that does soil testing. PEI, Prince Edward Island, soil lab tests, $3, $22. We want to aim for at least 65% calcium in the base cation saturation, ideally 80% calcium in the base cation saturation. If you want a good book that breaks down all of this, highly recommend Ideal Soil. It's good for understanding soil tests, figuring out how much amendments to add to your soil, and how to understand those tricky tests.
Thanks, Calvin. Travis, any advice to folks wanting to move away from salts towards soil-based cultivation?
Yeah, do it, first of all. It's a good idea. You end up with better product, you end up spending less money, and you end up impacting the environment a lot less. For me, it was the chase for the best product that led me to organic cultivation. I could pretend it was altruistic, but it wasn't. I wanted to grow the very, very best product I could find. I tried probably 7 or 8 methods before I hit on my current method, which obviously I'm still perfecting, as all of us up here are. I became fascinated by it because soil science and soil interactions at the root level are fascinating, and it's an area that we don't necessarily know a lot about. My wife is currently at the University of Victoria studying root exudate specifically, and it's an area where there are papers published and there is information, but there's not a lot, and so we're learning something new every day. The other thing about it is it's easy. If we start talking about home growers who want to grow 4 or 5 plants, you can set up a little 4x4, 4x8 bed. You can mix your soil, which is the hard work at the beginning, is assembling everything and mixing it together, but then after that, you're essentially just watering your plants. If you use like a biological IPM program, which sounds fancy, but it really means introduce some bugs that eat other bugs and make sure your soil life is always going. You can actually harvest your 4 plants perpetually without removing your soil, without having to do anything. You're recycling everything, you're not throwing anything away. And I think that's great for home users. For people that want to get into the commercial space, I can tell you right now that my overhead is lower than my competitors who use salt-based liquid nutrients. I save money. I produce at a lower cost per gram. And I also my labor is lower. My workers go in there, they spend their time observing the plants, observing the environment as a whole, and learning horticultural practices instead of walking around mixing newts into water and then watering all the beds. If you go automatic watering in one of these systems, you just keep them moist the whole time, and the actual maintenance is very, very low labor. And so in both cases, you'll save yourself money, you'll end up with better product, and it makes sense. Yeah, and you'll get more money for your product too. When you look at the commercial space right now, that's true. There's a demand in the legal environment for sure, but forever in the illicit environment for high quality organic input product.
Thanks, Travis.
When you spoke a little bit to terroir, did you want to share with us the approach you take to having land that isn't necessarily ready to take plants?
Yeah, I guess talking about if you were to have a piece of property and you were to be growing outdoors, if you're just starting and you're fresh and new, I think that the most important thing is just to spend some time on that land. Definitely get a soil test immediately. Bringing in all of your own soil. If you have to bring in you want to be able to utilize the soil that you have on the property. And if you're going to be bringing in other type of amendments, the most important thing that I really can give you all the information is to find out exactly where those amendments come from. If it's OMRI certified, which is the OMRI, it doesn't mean that it's organic. Unfortunately, that's an organic registry. It just says that it's registered for organic use. That's tricky language for all of us. It does not mean that it's organic. So if you're going to be bringing anything into your property, it's really important to ask for those tests from the manufacturer. You want to find out if there's any heavy metals. Ask for the toxicity report. That's incredibly important. And definitely ask for a glyphosate test, because toxicity reports do not have glyphosate testing on it. It's something that you have to get extra. And glyphosate is also the brand name is Roundup. That's a fungicide. We're finding it almost in everything. Things that are OMRI certified, we're finding high levels of glyphosate in it. And in a living soil system, or when you're making your own soil, repeated use of glyphosate, it's a fungicide. It kills microorganisms in the soil. And if you want to find out if your land is toxic and you don't go and get a soil, you can easily plant peas. Peas are a really good thing if you're moving onto a piece of land or you're looking at your property and you're wondering, gee, I wonder how this is doing. You can plant a pea and see how it grows. And if it grows really healthy, then you're probably okay, but you still want to get the soil tests. Also looking at the type of plants that you have in your area is really important. You know, utilizing comfrey, utilizing nettles, utilizing indigenous soil from areas that you can just mix into it. You know, you want to boost your microbiology by boosting indigenous microorganisms, and say that you're on a hike or anything in your immediate region or area, and you see a beautiful stream and everything's growing so beautifully well there. We can take a tiny little handful of soil and you can bring it back, and that can inoculate an entire acre. So microorganisms are incredibly powerful if you give them a wonderful, starting zone to work in. So just starting to think about, look at organic books. We don't need to learn how to necessarily grow cannabis. Let's just learn how to grow organically. And there's tons of information out there on growing organically. The other thing is if you get a soil test back and you see that maybe you're deficient in a certain type of mineral. Well, Calvin was talking about minerals earlier. You can go with a lot of different types of minerals, but if I were to take, say, calcium, and I'm going to eat a raw calcium, well, it's going to take my microorganisms a tremendous amount of time to digest that calcium, and I may only get 10 to 20% of that. Well, a soil is no different. But if you were to grow alfalfa, which is a wonderful biomass and a wonderful herb to put into all of your teas, into your soils, you can chop it up, you can use it, you can make it tea as a fertilizer. You can feed the calcium or the magnesium to that alfalfa, and then it's going to come up through the plant and make the calcium immediately available to your gardens. That can happen with almost any type of nutrient. Selenium, catnip is wonderful for that. Magnesium, you can feed a tremendous amount of Epsom salts to alfalfa, and it uptakes, and then it becomes immediately available to your garden. So utilizing what you have in your immediate zone, even your grass clippings can be used in your garden because they're totally full of nitrogen and tons of nutrients. So just sort of taking your brain outside of the idea of having to feed a plant and start feeding the soil. How can I feed my microorganisms in the soil? It's the same as your gut. If you have all these wonderful microorganisms, well, you can't keep them going if you're going to be feeding them crap and processed foods. They die off. We have to upkeep it by eating good foods, and that's the same as our soils.
I'll add to that by saying, with us moving forward with the cannabis industry and the way that we're going to be presenting our products to patients or to people that are coming, it's like, how do you represent your product? And part of it is, showing your appellation, which is the area that you live in, and then having terroir within that appellation, and that makes your herb taste a certain way. So if someone in Victoria or someone on the island or Cowichan Valley is going to have like this flavor profile that just comes from the soil, and it comes from the microorganisms on the leaves and everything, or someone in Kelowna or in the sunny valleys of central BC. So it gives us so people are selling, farms are saying, we're from this appellation and this is our terroir, and the way that you have terroir is to interact with your soil as much as possible. And I would just say like our biggest probably a suggestion in starting dirt or starting soil is to really, really ally with carbon and use wood chips or sawdust or all of it together, hay, wood chips, sawdust. It's a progression in succession of size into sticks. And you can look up hugelculture and hugelculture in cannabis, and there's a ton of information on there. You can do that in indoor living bed soils by building your beds in a certain way. And the purpose of having carbon is, one, to keep it out of the atmosphere and sequester it into the earth. Another is because it feeds fungi, and the fungi are really like a major composter of raw materials, and they really help deliver nutrients into the roots. So having a lot of wood and hay underneath your soil, and laying down hay and then some sticks on top of it, and then taking soil that you're on top of and just folding it over on top of that, and then adding another compost layer, and basically layer farming and layer mounding. And you can do it if you want like 1,000 feet long, or you can do a 4x4 bed in your backyard. But I would suggest using carbon in that way, because it really adds to the fungi. And in the summer, it really keeps water. And in farming, you know, climate change, one of the major drivers of climate change is the farming industry, and a lot of it's cows or whatever, and livestock, but it's also just farming. So if we can be a positive impact in climate change and use less water on a mass scale, that's a beautiful thing. So the water retains, the wood retains the water, soaks it up, sponges it, allows the roots to go and be active, and you can put rocks in there, find rocks, different kinds of them, put them in with the sticks and rocks, and then you can pack garden giants and King Stropharia mushrooms on the sides of your beds, and cover that with dirt and inoculate it, so you have mushrooms growing out of your bed, which is going to create more nutrients. So the more that you put into your soil, the less you have to rely on teas and other things. We love making teas, so we're not trying to stop making teas, but if you work with that kind of soil, it's absolutely tremendously fabulous. And it's empowering to use your own environment, and it's an amazing thing when you can grow amazing flowers at a minimal cost.
Thank you both so much. Calvin would like to.
I just want to add something to that quickly. Was it Kelly? Was that right? Yeah, Kelly was talking about Roundup Ready, and I think we've all got to be very aware of where our inputs are coming from. I think in South America mostly, they're using Roundup Ready to dry sugar. So a big proponent of Korean natural farming is using sugar, kind of like Han Solo. He was on to something there in Star Wars, but is using it, to make our nutrients. And you've got to be very careful that you're using organic sugar that has not been sprayed with Roundup Ready. So be very aware and learn your inputs.
Thank you, Calvin. So I'm going to go a little off the format of questions and ask a personal one to each of you, and you can choose who wants to go first. Speaking to Appalachians, given the choice of geography, where would you choose to grow?
Somewhere with a longer photo period than here. We've talked a little bit about Sungrown. Like, I come from the indoor world because it was illegal and you had to hide what you were doing. It is not because it is better. It is not because it's even a good idea. There's one cash crop in the world that's grown indoors, and it's cannabis. If I was given the choice to grow somewhere, it would be somewhere where I could grow long flowering cultivars outdoors under the sun and not have to worry about weather affecting my crop at the end of the season. Even though no matter what, an outdoor crop will have some seasonal variance. For here, it really is the short, like, clear weather photo period thing where, you essentially are looking at a 6-week safe growing period outdoors here, and 95% of cultivars won't finish in that time.
I agree with everything he said, and to choose an area is kind of like not very fair, because that's like, but the Kootenays is a really nice place, but it has a really short photo period, so you have to kind of turn that into a positive, because trichomes actually don't need to be in the full sun all the time, but a longer period, they do like that, so that there is a beauty to that. So if I'm not choosing Southern Oregon, that if I'm not going down there, then, I would choose a place that has spring water and soil and has neighbors that have animals or some a bit of resource around me that I could choose from. I like to have a healthy, and I don't want to be near big ag. Number one, I do not want to be near any kind of big ag, because there's dust, or I mean the spray that comes, overspray that comes from dicamba is one we haven't talked about yet. That's a defoliant, and that's probably worse than glyphosate because it's amazing. Land and the plants have created a resistance to glyphosate. So now they've created dicamba, which is a defoliant, so that's a little bit extra, but a lot of that's used on big ag, and there's a lot of millions of acres that are getting ruined. So anyway, think about your neighbors and choose ones that have healthy areas around you.
For me personally, I'm super excited to be starting a project in Colombia where the weather's between 22 and 28, and it's very close to 12-12 all year round at 4,000 feet. So the ability to, I think we're in a really interesting time right now as far as cannabis, and it's a race to the bottom with this indoor growing. Who can grow the cheapest bud the fastest? And we're all going to get our asses kicked by these countries that are around the equator. It's just a matter of time. It's coming. So I'd pick somewhere where the sun is close to 12-12. You've got lots of UVC coming in and lots of good weather.
I'll just make one more comment on it. As much as I would like to grow anywhere in the world, we're going to be the place that gives out licensing for legal cultivation first. So we are where we are. So let's make the best of it until these other countries open up for full scale. Like I would love to be able to walk down to my local shop and buy Colombian gold from Colombia. That would be amazing. But we're a decade away from that. So in the meantime, I will choose Canada because I'm going to get licensed here first. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore areas that'll be more friendly for outdoor growing. And I agree that, what we see with corporate indoor production is a race to produce as cheaply as possible. We will never be able to compete with outdoors by growing indoors under artificial light. It's just that extra burden, that extra cost, and that extra restriction on production is too much to bear.
Thanks for that insight. This would be for both Josh and Kelly. Given that licensing, the corporate cannabis industry is putting dollars before cultivation practices to reduce the cost to the customer. How do you see microproducers in the corporate game with price per gram, possibly being so low to compete against? What would you advise and offer as far as cultivation goes to be a strong, vital part of the market?
Have your own special genetics. Work with amazing genetics that work in your area and zone. Have a secondary product. Just hauling out pounds out the back door ain't gonna cut it. And most importantly, have the fire. Really grow the most high quality product for the least amount of money that you possibly can. And the way that I believe that we can do that as Canadians is light dep greenhouse and be done with your light dep by September 1st. Huge, amazing, beautiful results. The tests show that it's better quality. The terpenes show that it's better quality, our smell, and also the way that it makes us feel shows that it's a better quality. Because we can't compete with the quantity market. Not at all. It's over, it's done, the quantity market is over. So really focusing on your quality. And I believe that that's gonna come with Sungrown, early light dep, in soil, terroir, have a brand name that's your own, have a secondary product that you produce from your flowers, and do it well, and make a statement and tell your story about your farm or your facility.
And just to add to that, learn your strains, learn the history of strains. The podcast is an amazing, resource for learning the history of strains. Phylos Bioscience down in Oregon has got the Galaxy and a lot of really amazing information on there. I really suggest looking into that. Consider tissue cultures to learn more about your strains. And you know, that's going to be the way that we're going to be different, because the licensed producers are going to have to register everything they have and go through a million years of process to produce like all their strains. So what we have to do is be unique and be different. It'll never be. We've already really covered, you know, a lot of the reasons why that is, and all the growing techniques. But yeah, just to be able to create, you know, the best product, and that's going to be the best way.
Yeah, just to add to that, for people that are looking to be competitive with these large-scale manufacturers and want to get into the cannabis industry in Canada, it's not just about being different, it's about educating the people that will purchase your product on how you're different and why you're different. Building a brand that educates the consumer, that explains the difference, is going to be crucial for anyone who falls into that micro category or even the small business category, regardless of what kind of license you have. The fact of the matter is that, you know, where we live here in BC, we have a very educated purchasing populace cannabis use, because the people in the industry have worked hard to educate those that come into these storefront retail dispensaries. The consumers themselves have taken it on themselves to do the research and learn from their local shops. And so as producers, we also have to take that burden and take that onus on, that if we want to survive at a higher price point with better quality, we have to explain to the average consumer what that better quality is and why there's an added value to it.
Thank you, Travis.
I just want to respond to Travis, and I don't think it's going to be 10 years before we see Colombian gold coming out of Colombia. I think the licenses are being given out right now. I think by the end of 2019, you're going to see Colombian gold, oil, buds, and every other beautiful land-raised genetics that the world has been hiding away for us to be educated, just like the wine drinkers of the world. You know, it's going to be very similar. People are going to be seeking out these special drinks, these special wines, and it's going to be a beautiful thing, I think.
And I'll say full on, I hope Calvin's right. I just think that the government is going to be a bit more of a barrier. But, you know, I wish it was happening already, and the sooner the better. It can't happen quickly enough.
I just wanted to say something about importation. And we have traveled to these countries, and we have gone to the farms that have been talked to by some of the LPs here in Canada. It's a sad reality. They're offering them not very much money at all to get their farms started. They haul up a 20-foot container, and they give them all of the seeds that they need to grow, multiple pesticides that are totally illegal in Canada and in North America, fungicides that are illegal in both Canada and America, and they just say, go ahead and grow it. We'll take all of your product, and then we're going to bring it back to Canada, and it will be cleaned. So there could be something else to really educate ourselves on what importation means and what kind of practices are happening there and what the people are getting paid for their quality work that they're doing down there. And we have to wake up to that, and we need to really know if it is an imported product, is that imported product done with integrity? And are the people on the other side being taken care of, or are they being taken advantage of?
I'm gonna say something. And that's, again, what we have here in British Columbia. And to add to what Travis is saying, you know, we have the purity, we have the beautiful environment, we have the best, you know, option for making the cleanest cannabis in the world. And the world is in a world shortage of clean cannabis. And we'll help you define what clean cannabis is and everything. So in moving forward, you know, let's be an example for the world. You know, since we are legalizing here and we are moving forward, let's show them, you know, our magic that we have here. British Columbia is incredibly progressive. You know, it's an amazing spot. Some of the most amazing things have happened here. So let's take that magic and just like be a difference in this new paradigm.
Thank you.
I agree 100% with what Kelly's saying, and I don't think it's just a South American problem. I think Canada's got its own dirty little history here. About 98.54% of the growers I know use pesticides and fungicides and don't say shit to anybody. So it's not these big companies coming in. It's just that's the way corporate is. And if we want to beat these guys at their own game, we're going to have to empower the small grower to do it correctly.
Thank you. Speaking to that, is a question for Josh and Kelly. The industry is going to have strict testing for pesticides and fungicide residue. What integrated pest management and fungal management practices can you share with the micro producers and LPs that ensure your clones, flowers, and extracts will pass these tests?
Well, we've gotten over spraying things because of microbials, and we're just trying to do it in a way that can pass the low CFUs here, or the high CFUs that they're giving, well, not unfair CFUs, is that we've really moved to heat treatment. And I really wanted to share this all with you. Heat treatment has been phenomenally, it's working amazing, both in greenhouses and indoor situations. So bringing your rooms up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, it sounds hot, but these plants love it. Or 50 degrees centigrade for 2 to 3 hours. Make sure that your soil is totally damp, that you've given them a nice tea. And we find that a lot of soft-bodied mites, as well as soft-bodied aphids, and also the soft-bodied flies that live in the top of the soil, fungus gnats and other different type of pathogens, are totally die at 120 degrees. It works amazing, and then follow it up with predators. So we found that there's a new predator in the, a new pathogen in the industry. It's called the bong aphid. It's a beast. We haven't seen it too much in grow situations here, but I have seen it in BC, and it takes over, and it takes over really fast. It doesn't matter what you spray at it, whether you're spraying any type of a natural pesticide or a biological pesticide or a total toxic pesticide. Nothing works except for heat treatment. And then we've been noticing that with the broad mite. We've been noticing that with the erified mite. These are all heavy-duty pathogens on cannabis that people are dealing with daily. And like I said in our talk yesterday, I have yet to go into a garden here in Canada that doesn't have broad mites. It's like we're all growing with broad mites. We've all been dealing with these broad mites. It's like systemic, and we've been passing it on to each other. And I really think that get a scope. Most importantly, get a scope. Even before you start your soil or even think about putting in your license, go buy a scope. It's really important. And we have had huge success with large indoor facilities as well as large greenhouse facilities in utilizing heat treatment. There's no spraying at all, and then you follow it up with your predators, and you have a completely clean garden. And you can do that both prophylactically, like every 3 weeks. Get your greenhouses or your indoor facilities hot. You want to make sure that you're inside there with your plants. And if you see any type of wilting at all, you really want to bring the temperature down. And if you're in a greenhouse, you want to make sure that there's no direct light on those warm plants, because the pores open up on the leaves at 120 degrees, and then you just want to cool them down very slowly. 15 minutes is what I mean by very slowly. The plants bounce back immediately. We've seen tremendous growth off of heat treatment. You can utilize heat treatment all the way up until, harvest. You just want to make sure about your humidity. You can use much higher humidity in vegetative state, and you'll be able to get rid of any kind of pests quickly. But in your flowering, you don't want to bring your humidity up high at all. You want to have it nice and low, because you're going to be having flowers. You don't want to be heating up your flowers. But this is a wonderful opportunity that we can all try, and we've been spraying things, and we've been talking about all these different things that we can do with our plants and how do we get rid of these things. 120 degrees, 50 degrees centigrade, follow it up with predators.
So predators, allow you in early stages, and do it before you see anything, because you don't need to wait till you see the problem to do it. And it's Copert's a good one, because they don't use Syngenta, because they're a GMO company in the world, and they do a lot of stuff that we don't agree with, and that's important. Your dollar counts. Another thing about just the pesticides and all that. So with clones, you have to be extremely careful, because You can get clones from a clone source, and if they are not, if fungicide is the big thing in clones because it's a watery environment and other organisms can grow in there easy, so they get really nervous and they spray a lot of stuff, and they could spray myclobutanol or Eagle 20 or some kind of thing, without people knowing, and that goes systemic within the plant. And there's a lot of examples of this, and it's really important to notice that they can go systemic within the plant. You can take that plant from a clone source, grow it organically in your fully living soil system, and then get the flower, test the flower. It can test clean, and then when you go to make it into a concentrate, you make it into some kind of an oil, you'll fail your tests because the pesticides show up in there. And if you try and load that clone again and again and again, it can go up to 4 times where that clone is still dirty. So knowing your clone source, extremely important moving forward. Doing your own clones, making your own genetics, working with seeds, and doing like that kind of work is extremely important.
Just a general comment on pest management is there's a reason that horticultural practice calls it integrated pest management and not pest management. And it's because you need to plan ahead and think about pest management with every single action you take in your facility. The way you build your facility should be geared to avoid pest infestations, including having scrub in and scrub out rooms, having clothing that you wear only in your grow rooms. The second part is understanding how humidity works. When we talk about humidity, we talk about relative humidity. The relative part of that is heat. The real temperature is what affects that percentage. So understanding what vapor pressure deficit is, understanding what dew point is, are 2 crucial things to avoiding mold developing in your space. If you can control your humidity, you won't ever see a lot of the mold type pathogens that people worry about with cannabis.
One of the new technologies, I think it's a small British Columbia company, they're using radio frequency to get the CFUs under the legal limits. So they're just a small company right now, and maybe there'll be some progression in that in the next little while. But I think when you're taking things that have been used, pesticides that have been used, we're getting really good at the chemistry of separating those things out in products like distillates and stuff like that, but not so much in live resins and hashes and stuff like that, where, I mean, that's where all the fun is for most of us. So, yeah.
Thank you all for your views on that.
Really quickly, and if you're doing it outdoors, biodiversity and having other plants around is extremely crucial because and even indoors, it can help you understand your environment. Some things might get a mite before the cannabis. You're going to be able to see what's going on with those plants, and also it can create, sort of an equilibrium, where the pests and predators and things are going back and forth. So you get a little help right there. So that's just a quick note on it.
Thanks for sharing that. Given that, can you share with those in the audience what companion plants you might use?
I tend to use trap plants, so I use things like sweet basil and holy basil because mites prefer them to cannabis. I use things like marigolds to trap thrips and aphids. The term trap plant just means that the pests will go to that plant before they'll go to your cannabis plant. So as we walk in the door to the facility, we check all our sweet basil plants to see if there's any mites on them. If there's no mites on our sweet basil, the chances of there being mites on our cannabis plants are virtually nil. I think cannabis and companion planting indoors has been largely ignored by most of the industry. They set up as much cannabis canopy space as they possibly can, and they grow as much canopy space as they possibly can. I think we're going to find, as things change, as we move towards sun-grown product, as we move towards being able to do a little more research, treating it like a horticultural crop, we're going to see that we can use, again, planning ahead and using integrated methods to identify problems and treat them at the earliest possible moment is a better solution than trying to find a silver bullet once you have a problem.
Love it.
Thank you.
Totally agree with everything Travis just said, and I would add that fuchsia plants, you could hang fuchsia plants in the area, and they really attract broad mites, for example, and you can see your leaves curl, and if you know there's something like that's going. Geraniums are something that bugs don't like at all, so you could have a bunch of geraniums underneath your ganja plants, and that would be really awesome. I would like to say that medicinal mushrooms are something you could also put in there that really doesn't necessarily have to do with pests, but it's so awesome, and you can do log spawn and have it underneath that, and if you can grow 2 types of medicine in one system, I think that's a real bonus.
Integrated human management.
Exactly. Let's not forget about the human beings. Another one is yacon. It's a South American tuber, and it's something that's come into our life through the Peace Seedlings family down in Oregon, and it's a really sweet tuber, and it can be an alternative to sugar, and it's something you can grow on your farm. It's a really watery tuber. It's part of the lost foods of the Incas, and it's a beautiful helianthus plant. It has a yellow flower at the top towards the end of the season, and you can juice that water and cook it down and make a molasses. I mean, the molasses tastes damn near exactly like molasses. And to grow that on your property is really beautiful, and the tubers expand your soil and help move things, aerate your soil, and you can use the leaves in teas and different things like that. And there's a lot you can say with companion planting.
And since these guys really touched on companion planting for preventative and pest, I'd like to touch on companion planting for nutritive qualities. So there's a lot of different cover crops that you can use in your gardens to bring in certain types of nutrients from the soil. They become miners. They dig down into the soil and they bring it back up, or they get the nitrogen from the air and they bring it down into the soil. Sweet peas, so let's go from the very beginning. Let's say that we're just beginning our baby plants, we're putting them in the ground. What kind of cover crop do we want to put on there? Clover is a wonderful nitrogen rich. Chickweed is totally amazing. Peas are great. So those 3 are really easy to find. They're cheap and easy. And then as your plant starts to go into flowering, you can use amaranth, you can use fenugreek. Poppy is one that has a tremendous amount of phosphorus in it. So as the plant starts going into flowering, if you're constantly sort of uprooting your cover crop and you're laying it down, then you're bringing nutrients into your soil. So as soon as you take a cover crop, you turn it down, you can plant a new one on there. And if you're doing it in cycles to where you're planting 3 to 5 different types of cover crops, then you're covering all of the basic nutrients to help mine out of there for your plants, bring it up to the soil, bring it to the microorganisms, then the microorganisms eat it, and then they feed it to the plant.
Potatoes are really good, really easy, really good in the base. Ally with nettles, comfrey, have deciduous trees growing around your area, use the leaves, make sure there's leaf mold happening. There's a couple more.
I just add to that, when you're using, preventative sprays and stuff like that, charging those sprays so that they're sticking, electrically charging those sprays so they're sticking to the plants and you're getting full coverage and benefit from those actions that you're using.
Really quickly, I'd like to add is flowers, are part of supporting the pollinators and supporting our environment, but they're also really useful in foliar sprays, and yarrow's a really amazing foliar spray, and valerian, you can make a biodynamic prep out of valerian. You can make ferments out of full sunflower heads, with the seeds in it, and that's really useful.
Aloe as well. If you're growing cannabis, grow aloe. It's a wonderful hormone, natural hormone. It's a growth stimulator. It's really easy. It can go in all of your tea brews. It can be used as a foliar. It can be used to charge your foliars. Amazing. If you're growing cannabis, grow aloe.
Yeah, on the note of aloe, aloe has salicylic acid in it. And so when you water that or spray that onto your plants, it gives what is called SAR, but really means the plant's immune system, this boost. And so when, in a forest, when an infestation happens, the plants actually have a pathway that can communicate deeper into the forest to let them know that pests are on their way. And the plant kicks their systematic reaction up, their immune system up, to be ready for it. Salicylic acid is one of the things that actually helps hyperdrive that. So one of the only things, and hopefully something Health Canada will let us continue to use, is growing giant aloe plants on site so that we can fillet them, puree them, and feed them to our plants. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Willow bark is the other source of salicylic acid. That's the basis of aspirin, really. So,
It's also really good for clones, and it's a cloning rooting hormone. So, it can be part of your clone program that helps you bypass like a fungicide. Most of the rooting hormones for clones have fungicides in them, and that's probably the last thing you'd want. You want to actually add mycorrhizal fungi to that, and if you use a rooting hormone, you can't have mycorrhizal fungi. Also, I mean, the Essene is a culture that lived to where they were 120 years old by spraying their aloe plants with dead sea salts. So you can use salts and ocean salts which have lots of trace minerals, and you can spray them on your aloe plants, and then when we can ingest the aloe plants as well, of course, and when we feed it to our plants, you're getting a tremendous amount of trace minerals.
Chitin is another one of those natural things that'll turn the plant's immune system on as well, just like the salicylic acid. So there are lots of options out there. The lessons are really infinite when it comes to organic growing, and never stop learning and never stop testing and never stop trying new things. Horsetail too, silica, yeah, that's right. Another important foundation to growing plants, definitely silica.
yeah, silica is interesting because it's not obligate in cannabis. Cannabis actually doesn't require it to grow. But what it does do is it makes the plant more hardy. It makes when the cell growth occurs, it makes the walls thicker, and it instigates this growth pattern that creates tougher plants. And so while silica is not obligate, not required to grow cannabis, I would suggest that you always include something that contains silica in it.
Would one of you care to share about the plant's ability to remediate soil?
Yeah, well, that is the beautiful thing about cannabis. It's one of the bioremediators of soil, and it's a dynamic accumulator, and it pulls up toxins from the soil. So when Kelly was talking about, checking your soils and doing soil tests, it's extremely important. If you find yourself on some big ag land or somewhere where you have some toxins, you could use cannabis or use other biomass to transform the soil. So the only way to really truly clean up soil in a way that's going to be good in the future is to grow a crop on it and till it in. So if you're going to do a hemp farm, you're going to be in a field somewhere. You're going to have to really consider that with hemp farming. So you might have to consider rotationally, growing up your hemp and then tilling it back in. And then it's the act of the composting. It's the act of the raw materials, composting the soil, which cleans up. It can get rid of heavy metals and toxins. It's the magic of Mother Nature. So it doesn't have to be cannabis, but cannabis is one of those really amazing plants. So when we grow cannabis in the way that we're talking about in a natural system, we're really, really enhancing the earth.
Also mycology. They're the biggest bioremediators that we have on the planet, and the beauty about mycology is that you can plant King Stropharia and you can actually plant it in a totally toxic environment and test that mushroom and it comes up totally clean and the soil has been remediated. Totally amazing. Bring mycology into your life. There's amazing books out there by Paul Stamets, on and on, radical mycology, to learn about soils, to learn about mycology.
Archaea is one of those microbes that is really beneficial to our soil for remediating those types of, all types of weird and wonderful things. I forget what they call them, there's 7 pesticides or fungicides that this archaea is really beneficial at knocking them out of your soil system. So look into those things, multiply them, and use them in your life.
We're nearing the end of our time, and I was wondering if you were willing to open it up to the audience for questions. Does anyone have any questions? I'm just going to take the mic out into the crowd.
Repeat the question.
Sorry?
He's going to bring out the microphone.
I'm gonna hand the mic off. I see it. I'm just gonna take it to this gentleman here.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I work with Whistler Medical Marijuana. We're one of the organic LPs. It has been somewhat troublesome, but we are able to get plants passed with the organic system, but you can't foliar spray very late. But now Health Canada has actually said you can't spray anything foliar but water. So kind of hands tied behind your back there. But a question for Josh and Kelly. When you're taking that room to 50 Celsius, are you trying to keep the humidity high or low at that point?
You want to keep it higher in veg, absolutely, because the soft body exoskeleton pests are really responsive, so you actually need to keep your temperatures at that high of a level for probably only 1 hour if your humidity is higher. So you actually need to extend that heat treatment as you go into flower, because you want to keep your humidity very low as you head into flower. So high humidity into veg, it zaps them right away, and you can literally see broad mite eggs explode. It's so satisfying. It's just such a fabulous feeling. It's like, yes. So definitely you want to be able to have high humidity in veg, and then definitely reduce it in flower.
So not use as much water towards the end.
Okay. And then question for Travis or anyone. How late would you recommend spraying compost tea into your flowering? And then another question unrelated for anyone. For those micro producers who are limited to 200 meters squared, what kind of strategies would you recommend to maximize that growth? Like buying big vegged plants already and trying to get tall ones, or doing fast sea of greens, or whatever works for you? If you can give a bit there.
Yeah, so I mean, part of the thing with a micro, when you're talking under 2,150 square feet, a lot of the time you're just dealing with the building that you have already. Not everybody's building to spec from scratch. A lot of these people are small business people that already have a system in place. I tend to prefer to grow larger plants just because I find that, if I do 3 or 4 plants in the space of 20, I find I get a better yield, a hardier plant. I run into less pest problems if there was any. By that same token, a lot of people are limited by headroom. And so a lot of the time, like, we run larger plants in a scrog in the 2 buildings that we're applying for micros. And they're on, 3-foot horticultural benches, another foot for our beds. But we have really high ceilings. Like, I can pull my lights up to 15, 20 feet. So if I was in a situation where I could go higher, I might consider growing trees. I think one of the cool things about cannabis growing is that you can do it in a lot of different ways. And so we're experimenting right now. We've got our room cut in half. One side's doing big plants, one side's doing small plants. And whatever the results of our side-by-side, which isn't very scientific because you always get the results you want in a side-by-side, but the results will probably dictate that. And then from the spraying point of view, so what we've always done is we used to do compost tea and kelp tea offset every 2 weeks. And then we would stop in week 1 of flower, at the end of week 1 of flower. Never spray anything on a flowering plant. That's always been my motto. Even water. Like, you get late in flower and you want to spray water on your plants, you're creating a botrytis risk, you're creating a humidity risk. At the same time, I know that that's not how everybody does things. For passing quality assurance, if you're at Whistler, it's one of those things where there seems to be a threshold on the plant for distance from soil. And so our top colas will come in at 12,000 CFU, but if we leave the bottoms and the schnarf on the plant and test that, that comes back at 35 or 40,000 CFU. And so if we have the ability in the long term to have this modular license system come into place and be effective, I think the ideal situation for a micro is they buy medium-sized plants from a nursery that ship them and drop them off to them. They plant them, let them adjust to the environment for a couple weeks and flip them. They harvest them, they take the stuff that will pass QA first run and they bag that up or package that up as dried bud, and then they create extracts and value added out of everything else on the plant. Now, obviously at the outset of licensing, all that infrastructure won't be there, but I think a couple of years from now, that's sort of how micros will need to operate in order to both optimize revenue, but also in some cases just survive. Because QA is gonna be outsourced, but you still have to pass those tests, right?
And also answering that question, it really depends on what your final product is. If you're going to be having your final product as like a lipid extraction, or you're going to be utilizing a CO2 extraction, then you can definitely grow big plants, and the larf is incredibly valuable, and you get heavy weight off of that, and that's really awesome for extractions. But if you're going to be going into the flower market, then having plants that aren't as mature, you're growing a lot more tops, and that's really important for the market as well. So it really depends on what it is that your final product is going to be. And like I said before, I really suggest that everybody has a secondary product and isn't just selling flower.
I'd like to just thank you for your work at Whistler Medical, and everyone please check out Whistler Medical and that organic work. So big love to you on that. Really quick, I would just say, like with the water, I wonder if you could use salt water or use some kind of like dead sea salt or some kind of like ocean water to get that trace mineral. I wonder if that's like okay.
These spraying times really change too with a lot of the plants we grow aren't your standard plants. We're growing plants that flower 20 or 30 weeks. So if you're spraying at 8 weeks, it depends on what you're growing, you know? So it's all, relative to what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a point there. Like I've run 22, 23 week flowering varieties that didn't start producing any pistillate growth until week 8 or 9. So like Calvin said, it's like, pay attention to the plants for what you do for that. And I mean, the other thing is anybody that wants to get into this that isn't already doing it, experiment and find what you're comfortable with too. If you're gonna be a small business owner running a small garden, you're the one that's gonna want to spend your time in there. You're gonna wanna understand your processes, you're gonna want to enjoy yourself. So don't create burdens or enter into a system you don't like just because you think it might be optimal. From the other side, of course, if someone's looking to do something on a large automated corporate style scale, that also changes things as well. That changes a lot of the considerations for how you construct your rooms and how you're gonna, like what cultivars you're gonna grow. Not a lot of people are whipping out 22-week flower cultivars in a corporate environment.
Thanks for that thought, Travis. We have a question down here.
I'm familiar with a product called biochar. I don't know if anybody knows about it, but you mentioned it. It's called carbon. Now, I know it's been sequestered in the Amazon for 500 years, and it's been in the ground, and you get an average of, I believe there's a huge increase in productivity in what's grown down there. And have any of you growers ever used biochar or the carbon equivalent, and has it affected your grow? And do you use any type of autoflower in your growing, and you grow for medical specifically? Thank you. It's a loaded question. Thanks a lot.
So I have used biochar. Stuff's great. I don't use it all the time. I tend to use what's as local and close to me as best I can. And you know, the line between growing medically and growing recreationally or adult use to me doesn't exist. You grow a plant. What that plant's used for once you cut it down, that's up to, you know, the supply chain and the consumer themselves. Whether you grow medical cannabis or recreational cannabis, you're growing the same plant.
Also about biochar is that it's really important to sequester carbon into the soil. Carbon sequestering is what we all need to be doing, just even on our little property, even if you're just mowing your lawn. Sequestering carbon, and biochar is taking the carbon and putting a lot of it up into the atmosphere. Not necessarily, but it's also a faraway product. It's great, it's wonderful, it's helpful, but you can use carbon on your own land, like Josh was saying, lots of sticks, wood products, chips, anything like that.
So to make to make biochar takes heat, you know, so if you can use like the raw product of the carbon we were talking about, you know, you get the longevity out of it, not taking anything away from biochar. There's a lot of actually different kinds of biochar. Biochar is not all from wood. I mean, it can come from all kinds of different sources. So, and then there's like these pyrolysis machines that take like, I don't know, 2,000 degrees, a bunch of degrees. So, you know, I would make it at your home with some dirt and whatever, you know, I think it's really valuable. It's also something that really is going to be useful long term. You know, if you're just doing some quick turnover out of pots, I don't think you're going to get as much out of the biochar than whether you're doing some continuous living soil for a long time where the microorganisms can make homes within the biochar. And I don't think you want to use too much biochar because, like, if you took a lot of activated charcoal or whatever it is, but that's not true for everyone. But it can slow you down and stop you up. So there is a limitation.
So basically what you're doing with biochar is you're loading your soil full of nutrients, your CEC. And some soils have a naturally higher CEC like peat. So they'll hold a lot more nutrients than, say, something called a cocoa medium, right? Or a natural soil that's in the Amazon rainforest that needs to be loaded up. So basically it's a store for those nutrients over a long period of time. So you've really got to understand what you're working with in the beginning and how you're going to use it and how it's going to affect your garden in the end.
And like a last note on biochar, just be aware that there's a wide variance of quality, and you have to charge it. So you're taking this porous thing and you're charging it with nutrients and microbiology or microbiologicals, and then you're adding it to your soil. So just like, any old biochar isn't the same thing as getting high quality biochar, charging it yourself, that kind of stuff.
Thank you. If I could ask you all to share one last thought about why you chose to grow in this fashion and what you might impart to someone who's just getting started.
Because we've never done it any other way.
It's what feels right. It's just what's right. It's what has to be, and it's no matter what.
Logic and ethics. Those are the two reasons I grow organically. I produce better product with less environmental output, with less money, with less labor compared to any other method I've tried. And if that isn't a logical reason to do it, I don't know what is.
So basically 20 years ago or so, we were being taught by the hydroponics industry, and I don't know how many of these guys, it doesn't sound, but you were taught to grow with salts, and then you evolve and you evolve, and as you start to learn and grow, you start to become more as a person that wants to become one with nature instead of separate from nature. So I think it's just a logical thing to do if you want to be a human.
Kelly, Josh, Travis, Calvin, I wanted to thank you so much. The audience for your attention and for joining us.
Can we just say a little bit about where to find us? Can we tell people where to find us, or a little last minute thing?
If you wanted to each share where the audience might find you if they had further questions.
You can find us on dragonflyearthmedicine.com, on Instagram. You can find out about pure certified regenerative farming on DEMPureFarms.com. And I'd like to encourage you to look into the Cascadia Agricultural Co-op. I'd like to ask you to look into the Open Cannabis Project. I'd like you to look into the Regenerative Farm Award that's happening down in the Emerald Cup as well. And everything these guys are doing.
So I'm involved in quite a few things. My primary thing that we're doing right now is help people get licensed. Well, we apply ourselves for federal licensing. That's done with a company called Groundwork Consulting. My partners there are Jamie Shaw and Cortland Sandover Sly. You can find us at groundwork.consulting. I also set up facilities, staff facilities, and implement organic methods as Levity Solutions, levitycannabis.com. And then if you want to enroll in a grow course, I teach a grow course at Camosun College on Vancouver Island. We're associated with Kwantlen Polytechnic here in Vancouver and the Greater Regional District. And you can find that at camosun.ca.
You can find me and yourself in the soil in your local garden.
Thank you all so much.